Welcome, everyone. I'm Andrew Stuck from Walk, Listen, Create. Walk, Listen, Create is a social enterprise, not-for-profit, supporting artists, performers, and writers, people like you who make work on foot or to be experienced on foot. We're part of this European project, the Walking Arts and Local Communities. So I'd like to acknowledge the EU Create Europe programme for funding the Walking Arts and Local Communities project. Okay, so what happens next? I'm going to invite the four presenters that we have this evening to say a few, just very few words about themselves, and then we're going to run through four recorded presentations that they gave. And following that, we'll have a short discussion for about 5 or 10 minutes, during which time I hope you guys in the audience will start to write in comments, opinions, questions in the chat. And then what we'll do is we'll go to the chat, follow through people in the chat and invite you to ask questions, raise a comment, say some, whatever it might be that's key to you. Now, the presentations themselves, we asked the presenters to address 5 questions. And these are the 5 questions we asked them to address in their presentation. Who you are and what was your walking piece that you documented with a map. Why you chose a map to document your piece. The process, what was the process of creating the map? And what were the plus points for having the map? And on reflection, what would you have done differently to improve what you did and why? Now, I'm in a minute going to invite them just to say hello. When that happens, in the chat, I'm going to post links to their bios, their profiles on Walk, Listen, Create. Now, many of you are new to Walk, Listen, Create. And what I want you to do after this event is I want you to add bio and a headshot to your profile. And any walking pieces that you've made, I want you to contribute to our archive. The good news is that when you go through to a profile link on Walk, Listen, Create, there's a little pink box which says walking piece. And you can click on that and go straight through to all the walking pieces that have been submitted by that individual to the archive. So during this, when the presentations come and they talk about a particular piece, if you want to go back and refer to it, you can go through to their profile, click on walking piece and find out about it there. Okay, I'm going to invite David Haley, Lucy Furlong, Janette Kerr, and Emily Artinian to say hello. David, would you like to start?
Hello, I'm David Haley. I'm an ecological artist and researcher, and I live on Walney Island.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I live in just outside London, Greater London, and I am a poet and a walking artist.
Hello, I'm Janette Kerr. I live in Shetland and also in Somerset. I kind of segue between the two places. I'm a painter of wild seas, and I use maps in various ways in my work.
Hi, I'm Emily, and I live in East London and part-time in Philadelphia, where I run an art space, and I'm an artist and curator, and I occasionally use walking in my work. I have a collaborator in the walk that will be presented tonight, Lynn Charleston, and she isn't able to be here tonight, but she is based in Ludlow.
Okay, so thanks to you all, and thanks for the presentations you've made. And now it's my turn to try and make it all happen. So let's see whether I can start with David's. It's a PowerPoint.
Ecological artist, David Haley. My maps are about wood, land, dialogue, and unremarkable poetics. This was a commission from Chrysalis Arts Development for their programme Mapping Martin Wood. I used mapping in my practice for many years, initially inspired by American ecological artists Helen Mayer Harrison and Newton Harrison. And then, as artist in residence at the Institute of Terrestrial Ecology, now the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, that was when they introduced GIS and Landsat imagery into their countryside information system. As David Hockney once put it, the way we depict space determines what we do with it. Every map tells a story. So I adopted a storying approach to explore the wood. Storying is both the making and telling of stories. The texts are therefore a dialogical map rather than the visual data. We have all mapping Martin Wood program and all the different perspectives and interests involved. I started with the question, what's in it for the wood? The reply from the director of the North and East Yorkshire Ecological Data Centre was, it's an unremarkable wood and has no great significance. My colleagues were initially disappointed, but I thought that was a good thing for such a wood to be commonplace. I then asked, what does the wood want to do? Maybe it would connect to other remarkable woods. And this is the collection of stories that map Martin Wood in the now. The word map became a printed online zine atlas of the wood's possible futures. I would like to have included visual data from the North and East Yorkshire Ecological Data Centre's Agile project with the University of Oxford. This project gathers 12 UK datasets to assess the potential value of places to be conserved or restored or not.
I'm Lucy. I'm a walking artist, writer and poet, and amongst other writings and visual work, I've published 2 poetry maps, Amniotic City in 2011 and Over the Fields in 2015. There's also been a second edition of Amniotic City, which was published by Sampson Low in 2022, and Amniotic City is the one I'm going to talk about. Amniotic City began as a series of documented walks, and these took place roughly around the area of Fleet Street and St Paul's Cathedral in the City of London. The idea of a map came up one day when me and my friend were talking about how best to present the poems and photos I've been working on. Conceptually, a map made the most sense as a form of publication. It seemed the best way to give the reader the opportunity to go to that place and read the poems in situ, but also walk to the other locations on the map, choosing where to go next. Both of the original poetry maps, Amniotic City and later in 2015 Over the Fields, had similar and differing processes of creation, but were published using the same format, an A6 fold-out map with the actual map and photos on one side and the poems on the other. Each location had a pin and string motif, which connected the location and photos on one side to the poem on the other side of the map. Amniotic City was created via many walks in the locations, documenting with photos and notes, and this involved weekly psychogeographical drifts or derives, starting from various points and allowing a process of discovery to unfold over several months. Most of these walks were solo, but some were with my husband and others with my best friend. One was the last day I ever took my son out in his buggy when he was 3, and this became the subject of a poem on the original map, Drift with Buggy. Here, you can see him drifting through the temple. What you can't see is me chasing after him with the buggy and my camera. When I went back to the location in 2022 to work on the second edition, it was 11 years later. We were at the end of the pandemic. The city had changed, and so had my experience. And it was interesting to find my perspective on the place altering. The second edition of the map reflected this. Some of the ideas and themes of the original 2011 map were, to use another Debordian concept, detourned. You can see briefly on this next slide, which also shows the pin and string motif clearly, and that the poem Drift with Buggy has been replaced with Drift with Sekhmet, a poem about COVID and corruption in the city. Having a map, and now a second edition of that map, is a tangible, instructive and visual way of locating poems, of allowing someone to go and find them. The artifact of the map is a message that the walking and being in that place is a significant part of the experience of reading and understanding. The reader of the map has choices about the journey and the order of the experience. This allows many combinations of reading and experience possible. On reflection, I would have put an ISBN number on both of the original maps when they were self-published. The second edition of Amniotic City was published by Sampson Lowe Limited and does have an ISBN. Auburn Lowe also made a film of me walking and talking about the map in 2022. I wish I'd made some film of the other maps at the time they were originally developed. I'm hoping that there will be some Amniotic City walks in the future. We usually find our way across a landscape. The phrase, as the crow flies, is one that suggests a direct route between one point and another, but we all know that this isn't usually possible. Nevertheless, the walk I'm presenting is an attempt to do this. With my partner Steve Poole, who's a better map reader than I am, we decide to walk a straight line of our own making. I'm calling this a counterintuitive line, where we deliberately ignore the usual desire paths or options suggested by the logic of the topography. We start by drawing a line on a map from our house directly to a small remote bay called the Eyre of Walwick, then set off trying to keep to this line. We've been walking here for 15 years, so we know the landscape well. The maps are in our head. In Shetland, liberated from the restrictions imposed by English rights of way, we walk and wander at will. On this occasion, the strictures of our route demands constant referral to an OS map. Walking a straight line in ankle-catching heather and rock-strewn terrain with its many lochs and streams is tricky. Some of the time we don't have direct sight of the journey dictated by our imposed line, so we're constantly consulting the map, identifying line masses, and doing a lot of pointing. Trying not to veer too much from this line requires scrambling over rocks, climbing up and picking our way down steep slopes, and ploughing through boggy bits that we might otherwise avoid. But recognising we can't walk on water, we skirt around lochs to regain our line on the other sides. There are also lines going our way carved into the ground by sheep who clearly have a similar objective. Surprisingly, although our line studiously avoids most of the obvious landmarks we might more intuitively head towards, it does pass directly through one ancient hilltop cairn, making this stretch of the journey a little simpler. Walking like this takes us to places we haven't been to or spent much time in. We're conscious of the discipline of the line and the geology and the flora that we can see on it. The ground decorated with flowing old man's beard. The smell of flowering heather as we kick up dusty pollen. Startled birds rise from the ground and fly into the sky. A hare races away across the rocks. Sheep stand on summits bleating. They can all follow their instincts, but we are bound by our line. Finally, below us is the bay, the Eyre of Walwick.
with its gleaming, lapping sea to gaze across as we wander around the stony beach. Aesthetically, we might have walked to the top of the hills for views or taken an easy route around the bottom, but we didn't. We kept to our line, and we discovered new vistas. Tracking our progress on my phone app, we did pretty well at keeping to our prescribed line. It's reasonably straight. On reflection, we should have recorded our conversations because they were about the activity of mapping, working out where we were, what we could see, which way to go next, and about rediscovering our place.
Give and Get was a project initiated by myself, Emily Artinian, and artist Lynn Charleston, exploring value and meaning through object exchanges. Participants traded overlooked personal items for objects from a rotating collection, with Lynn and I documenting their narratives about what was given and what received.
Sorry, is that running to you guys?
Objects gain value through noticing, through handling, and through storytelling, as opposed to through monetary worth, creating an evolving archive that tracked how circulation and memory create interest and value.
I'm sorry, folks. Did you see that? Because it was coming up saying, oh, you were just looking at me and not looking at the video. Were you able to see or hear anything, Emily?
Yes, but then the sound continued a little, and then the image disappeared. And I'm just seeing if I can pull it up. Yeah, if you would allow me to share my screen.
Yeah, I've done that.
Okay, and I'll advance a little bit since you have all seen that beginning part. Collection with Lynn and I documenting their narratives about what was given and what received. The project examined how objects gain value through noticing, through handling, and through storytelling, as opposed to through monetary worth, creating an evolving archive that tracked how circulation and memory create interest and value. Lynn and I, having studied and worked together in London, living on different continents at the time of the project, kept up a parallel personal exchange of objects between ourselves. Some of these were long-held personal items, but a strand evolved around noticing and collecting street rubbish. Questions around global flows of waste, or what gets considered to be waste, became part of our discussions, and from these emerged the idea for junk swap walks and artist books recording these walks. In the flattened capitalist landscape of the near same commodities everywhere, were there differences and similarities we would find in discarded items if we looked? Perhaps, too, our object exchanges were a way of remaining close, collaborating in and through matter after we'd moved apart, as a way of sharing the places that we knew in an intimate, multi-sensory, bodily way. The map I drew for Junk Swap has been useful in two important ways. Firstly, to plan my route. I didn't actually need to take the map with me. I knew Ludlow so well that having drawn the route, I could take it with me in my head, my body even. But recently I've used the map differently as a recording, more of a memory, and I've been able to retrace the route, this time taking the map with me as a guide. Looking again at our walking maps makes me realize how maps lend themselves to storytelling. Both of us have recorded on the map places where we stopped, but for shopping, browsing the market, or having a snack, which was all part of the experience of picking up the junk. These would have been overlooked entirely without the map. We took a minimalist approach. On reflection, we could have used the maps more effectively to make the experience come alive for readers. For example, by including thumbnails of the locations of some of our finds, this would have emphasized the difference between
rural Ludlow and the cityscape of Chicago, which actually makes the similarity of the junk that we collected even more remarkable.
Great, thanks, Emily. And I'm sorry about that going all wrong, but something had to go wrong, didn't it?
Always, yes.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to try and get some questions going and discussion between the four panelists. And during this time, we'd really welcome everyone in the room to start putting things in the chat, questions you might have, or opinions or comments, or you want to raise something about work that you've done yourself. Yeah, I'll put the question to a sort of nice generic question to start off with, is that some of you made your work quite a long time ago. So are you still using mapping now as a means to document your work?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm never tied down to any one art form or discipline. I use maps as and when I think they're appropriate to the work that I want to do. So they may well pop up again sometime soon.
Shall I say something? I mean, I think that I don't actually know whether I would consider myself as somebody who makes maps, but I use them. They come into my work in a number of ways. I really like looking at old maps, like old 19th century maps, because they sometimes have all kinds of information, like names and things on maps that contemporary maps don't have, and that they act as prompts. I think, for me, the map acts as a prompt. So I'm continually looking at a map, plotting the world around me, plotting where I'm going, and those kind of things suggest connections and correspondences. So that's the way I still continue to use maps.
Lucy or Emily, which
I can say something briefly. I also have only used maps occasionally when they suggest themselves, and that could be in concert with many different forms, including installation, including artists' books, and including film. But I'm reminded when you ask that question, when we talk about the question of whether one uses maps at all, I'm reminded of a character in a Borges story. I can't remember which story, but there's a moment where somebody's making a map of the world that is 1-to-1 scale. Like there's this idea of it's we're always mapping. I mean, it's not only something that is kind of GPS driven or something written down or drawn on paper. So it's a hard question to answer that you pose, Andrew.
Yeah. So similarly, I didn't really expect to make one poetry map, let alone two. But I'm glad I did, and they were kind of like the most sort of formalized, tangible, outputs, I suppose. And I don't necessarily know if I'll ever do one of those again. But yeah, mapping is always somewhere in my work, and but in the way that sort of Janette was talking about it, there's always something that's happening that's some form of mapping or reference points. So it will pop up somewhere again.
it's not that I'm expecting you all to throw the maps away altogether, or that you just spend your entire life looking at maps. I mean, one of the things that I find kind of interesting is thinking about how we can explain what we do or describe what we do in terms of our walks that we might undertake. And I've always thought that the map is quite a good way of taking the sort of intangible into a tangible form. But for Emily, you've used artist books a lot. So I mean, and Lucy, you produce chapbooks yourself. So does the book or the become a greater priority than a map? Which is weighed more important to you?
Lucy.
It is what works for the project. So I don't really have I don't have like a favorite, the maps really seem to work for the two projects that became maps. They felt map shaped, if you know what I mean. Whereas the other projects worked better as chapbooks, or collections really.
I think that the idea of storytelling came up in a couple of the presentations, right? And maps being a narrative form, and so that in that way, they're a very close relation to artists' books or book or film or any kind of sequential form of art that you're making. Mm-hmm. Mm. I often see people who work primarily in artist books turn to the format of the map. Absolutely. Yeah.
Where Lucy, when you made the maps, was it critical that they were kind of folded out like maps?
Yeah.
I mean, that was.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite. I really didn't expect it. I was doing, especially with the first one with Amniotic City. It was a project that, I mean, I was lucky. My best mate is a designer, and so we just were kind of trying to work out what to do with it, and and then it was just like, yeah, it could be a map, and it just made a lot of sense to do it in that way. That was the thing. The whole thing sort of lent itself to being a map. And it is where it's my happy place, really. Just walking around London is my happy place. And before I had Google Maps, it would be an A to Z in my pocket, so I've got a whole collection of A to Zs that are kind of vaguely falling to pieces still. So I hadn't thought about it becoming a map, but then, yeah, that was, and then we thought, right, well, if it's going to be a map, it needs to function like a map. So even though, I mean, as Emily says, the idea of I've written this down, I think in all our presentations, we're all talking about stories. And so it functions like a map, but it also is a story, it's a narrative. So, yeah.
Shall we go to some of the questions in the chat? Shall we do that?
Yeah.
Amanda Steer. Oh, Janette, you want to say something first?
I was just interested. I was just going to ask Lucy whether she'd considered making a kind of a version of her poems, which actually people could find in the sites that she has written about. So like a GPS thing. So it would be like somebody would have the map, they would follow it, and then they could listen to your poem, actually you reading it in the place that you've written about. I mean, it's a way of mapping your poems, but it's actually a much more, your voice will be there, or somebody's voice will be there. They could hear the poem sort of using a GPS system.
That's a lovely idea. Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I love that idea. Why not? Yeah, thanks, Janette. That's a great idea.
I've kind of done it
Love
in
it.
I've done something similar in Shetland on an old beach, which was it's called Stennis. And I decided I didn't actually want a physical map, but people have to wander and they find these sounds. So it's almost like they have to make their own map across this, and each person's journey will be different, and they'll find these different sound pools that are kind of floating around in the ether.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Yeah, I might drop you a line about that. I'd love to know more about that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's one of the things where with Amniotic City, that was one thing. Then we did I made a second map, which was about a piece of green belt that generations of my family have walked in. So it had a slightly different feel to it. And by that point, we put some QR codes onto it. And that felt like a bit of a sort of utilizing that technology at the time. But of course, yeah, as things have moved on, I mean, that would be a lovely thing to go back and do. So thank you. That sounds great.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, would Amanda Steer like to ask what she's written in the chat? She was the first person who got a pen to paper.
So I love the names as well. I noticed whilst you were talking on going through your presentation, there was a field called Mucklehoo, which was I thought was quite sweet. What I wondered was, having plotted a line, did that add to the playfulness, like you were going out kind of on an adventure for this journey, or did it make it more of a destination walk, like you were just like, you know, with there more curiosity there because of the line, or did it make it more going from point A to B kind of thing?
I mean, I think it was about going to A to B, but actually there was all kinds of things that we'd noticed places, as I said, I think in my presentation, it took us to places we hadn't been before or hadn't seen from that angle before. So that was really exciting to do that. I mean, I usually just go out and wander. I'm actually a really crap map reader. So I like the idea of actually just sort of traveling around and finding places, almost like mapping my own journey across. But yeah, I mean, it was an interesting, it was quite challenging, especially when you came to a loch and you had to kind of think, okay, I've got to be over, I'm over there now. So, but it was a fun thing to do as well.
Yeah,
I did it because I'm part of the Walking the Land group, which Amanda is part of. And at the time, they were all walking along a railway line, a straight railway line. We don't have railways in Shetland. So that's why I decided to create my own straight line. So
yeah. And from the sound of it, made the familiar unfamiliar.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Okay, Barbara, you've got a question for David.
Yes. Hi, David.
Hi there.
Nice to see you.
Hi there. Yeah.
Yeah, nice to see you again.
Yeah.
On the small screen. I was really struck by especially the opening image in your presentation of this view of the canopy from a particular perspective. And I wanted to know what your comments might be about the use of drone technology, which gives us a different view of topography, and also GIS or GPS, which, has only had civilian access for 25 years now, and whether and how that's changed your thinking about mapping and about topography and about walking in forests in particular.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so from my perspective, every map tells a story. And most maps have a purpose. As I mentioned earlier, when I was in residence at the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, it was at the time when GIS had just been invented and introduced into British mapping systems. And all the people within like 2 weeks started to talk about the world in layers. It became everyday language that, the world was made of layers. And I just had to go back to these, really nice people and say, well, I'm sorry, but the world isn't made of layers. This is just an absurdity. And they looked at me as if I was, some kind of crazy guy or an artist. And I said, no, I'm sorry, but we need to think about the world in different dimensions, and from as many different perspectives as we can possibly. So the idea of seeing the world from different perspectives interests me greatly, because each perspective tells its own story. And all of my work is based on the idea of questioning things. So if I'm making a map, the first thing I do is question the map. What is the validity of the map? It's like Bartholomew Road maps. If you actually look at those, they tell so many lies. If you actually measured the width of a motorway on a Bartholomew Road map, it's about 3 miles wide. Things like forests, moors, fields shrink in size. Cities increase in size because actually the only thing it's really interested in are the roads. So I'm really interested in what goes into the making of a map, why somebody wants to make a map, how a map's made. The piece of work that I actually showed, the QR codes take you to Chrysalis Art's website, where I actually talk through the whole of the texts while walking through the woods. And so, again, in that project, I was interested in all the different perspectives of people in the community, of the other artists who were involved in the program. And it just struck me that nobody was actually asking the wood what it wanted to do, and the place of the wood. And so I became interested in trying to give agency to the wood, and see what the wood might want to do with itself and how it might want to map itself. Because I'm also very interested in what I've termed phenomenological drawing, which is the way in which things draw themselves. So the trail of a snail, spiders' webs, different defects in brickwork, really sort of everyday sort of nothing things that actually I find completely and utterly fascinating when you actually come to question them. I hope that answers your question, Barbara, and thank you.
Yes, thank you, David. And I just wanted to say that I'm going to be on the panel that's presenting on Wednesday, and I think I've got some footage from Bulgaria with you in it. So
Oh, wow.
if you're able to watch, that would be great. But I just wanted to make one remark, and what you've underscored really beautifully is the sort of the impossibility of walking with a map, looking at a map, and making a map at the same time. This problem of simultaneity that maps don't really work with. Anyway, thank you very much.
No, I should just finish off, if I may, on that. The project I originally came up with, or within that project, was a thing called a polyptych. Most people know what a diptych is or a triptych, but a polyptych is the thing that Renaissance churches used to have that open out, which again present another form of mapping. And that was where I first started, but it's a long story out. I got to where I did. It's just not worth it. Okay. Thanks again.
Ian, you mentioned something around Emily and Lucy's narrative, which I think Emily brought in herself. So would you like to say something on that?
I'm interested in this notion of narrative mapping, because my concerns are with deep mapping, which is as much about time as it is about place, or it's about the times we find in places. And it just seems to me that it's sometimes useful to think of mapping as a verb and as something that is done separately from the idea of the map as an object, which once it's arrived at is kind of fixed and quasi-definitive. Whereas the great thing about narratives is that they become the basis for conversations and then they move on. And so the process of mapping doesn't stop.
Either Emily or Lucy going to respond to that or not?
Well, I think that like one thing about the everyday GIS maps that we live with, you know, there is a hierarchical authoritativeness that something like Google Maps presents as or wants to present as, and in fact, it's all it's a real kind of is it mishmash the right word of time, right? There's so many different sometimes if you the satellite mapping for, you know, one area might be 10 years old in some very remote locations, for instance, and others might have been updated yesterday. And there's I think there have been a bunch of sort of interesting projects about kind of time travel through traveling through Google Maps, but I really sort of love that idea of working on deep time and maps, Ian. I think like it's kind of got my mind going.
So with my maps, yeah, I was very interested in the idea of deep time. The one with Amniotic City, because I kind of was walking around without a map at all for that, and I was just drifting around and just seeing what I found and responding, and then going off and doing some research later. It was really interesting. It was, I did have some really interesting moments doing that. I just sort of went with it really. And then, of course, the narratives developed with the people that I was walking with, or if I was walking by myself. So those narratives kind of developed. But the idea of deep time, particularly that bit of the City of London, there is a lot to discover that is sort of still, even now, still sort of tucked away, really, which is quite nice. But the interesting thing was when I went back like 11 years later and did the second edition and really felt quite differently and felt like I had like a different sort of, the map started to have a sort of different, I was kind of drawn to the area in a different way, and I started walking in different directions and going to different places, and it had a very different feel to it in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, from that point of view, that whole idea of deep time and how things change. It was very interesting. Yeah.
I was just going to continue. I've used this map, which is I don't think you can get it anymore. It was produced by the Victoria County History Society, and it was called Historic Places, but it was based on the OS map of the first edition, 6 inch to the mile, and you could put it on your phone, and you could look at a map that was like net for now in this time, but you could also look at the first edition map, and you could just sort of drift between them, and that really gave you a kind of an interesting sense of time, because of things that were so in my area in Somerset, there's a lot of old coal mining, and it would pinpoint you. We could go for a walk, and you could then say, okay, well, there used to be a mine here, or there was a mine shaft, or I mean, that was a really interesting kind of because then it kind of made you think about the history of the place and what had happened in that place. And I did another project where I was walking along a footpath and where there was mining underneath me. And so I was looking at old maps of the mining and the strata underneath the places that I was walking. And that really gave me a sense of of the history of the place and other people being there and what they were doing there at that time. And anyway, that's what I was going to say.
If you've got things that you want to comment on or whatever, you add them to the comments beneath the event page, because we have comments there and you can add comments to them. Ellen, you were next up. You mentioned something about the fact you broke your dominant wrist and you did something different. So with mapping, do you want to talk about that, or how do you feel?
Sure, briefly. I was doing sketching. It was the very beginning of the pandemic, and it was about 3 months before the shutdown in my area in Canada. And I did some sketching. I did mapping internally. So this is with my right hand. I'm left-handed. So that's why my comment about mapping internally. And I did another one because I wanted to figure out what the heck had happened in there. And so I mapped the bones of of that left hand. This is all done with my right hand, which was interesting. And then I also tore my rotator cuff. So I did some mapping of the inside of my body there. I had to do some research for this. So I raised this as another way to think of mapping inside instead of outside.
Great. No, thank you very much for that. Marieka, you've got quite a chunk there. Hopefully it's you can précis that or tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, maybe you can just simply read it for reasons of time. So, well, I noticed that there seems to be some deep brain distrust of, well, yeah, what could be called cartographic reasons. And I noticed that it's both more romantic, conservative types, and I mean the working scholars among us, like Ingold, and more radical or Marxist types. And I was wondering how you guys, you artists, feel about this. And maybe I thought there is a difference, and I think this has already been touched upon, especially by Ian. Maybe there's a difference, a qualitative difference between experiential or narrative maps and those published by OS or A to Z or Google or military maps. So, well, and just to add a little bit, I think this distrust is somehow caused by, yeah, the idea or the assumption that maps tear one out of the lived embodied experience of one's environment or something like that. So, and it suggests a kind of disciplining or controlling kind of panoptic vision. So, but I was just wondering how you feel about this, because you seemed all to yeah, obviously pretty much like mapping as a way of doing justice to your walking experiences.
Okay. So may I come in on that? Well, of course, I mean, we get cartography from Descartes. And Descartes' perspective on the world was that it was all mechanical. And I'm being very blunt about this. And of course, what he invented also was the Cartesian grid, which completely envelops the world and politically and philosophically gave permission for Western culture to colonize the rest of the world, because you could draw and you could abstract all the world, the whole globe in one go.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why I start from the standpoint, if you like, of questioning all maps. A project that I worked on recently, a filming project with a friend of mine, Larry Campbell. We started with the question of why did this small stream provide the water for the industrial development of Barrow-in-Furness. And that took us on many walks along a particular stream and all the tributaries that it came off it. But most interesting, one of the interesting things was then when we went to the local archive and found many maps that were for the sale of land, for mining and for property and for the laying of railways and so on and so forth. And the control of land and the control of what we now call resources on those lands, which of course continues unabated to today and is very well mapped.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on that? I think like that, I love this part of the discussion. Thank you, Marika, for bringing it up. I think that you know, and that Cartesian grid is a strangulating grid, and it is also an extremely distorting one. And one project I have had at the space in Pennsylvania is by a Japanese artist, Kaori Hama, who lives in Greenwich and has done for a long time. And she's got a project where she moves the prime meridian around the world. And the idea came when she first moved to the UK and realized that in Asia is at the center of the map, and so there's this question of centering, distorting, and there is always some kind of Foucauldian control in the design of official maps. There are always things that are unmappable, and like I think David is so wonderful to kind of poke at what's mappable. Yeah. And I think that one thing that we're all doing one thing that the individual mapped experience gives is an experience of the demotic every day, and that's not going to be on an official map anywhere. And though I guess you could ask about something like Google Maps, which is so globally kind of crowdsourced in a way, even though it's stolen data. You know, there's much lived experience included, you know, in everybody's kind of restaurant reviews or whatever review. Every single thing in the world seems to have a review attached to it, and so like even, you know, some rocks in Shetland might have a review on Google Maps.
Yeah, even the North Pole. I once read it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, I think there's a way of kind of like pushing back at this kind of state control. Yes.
Yeah. Can I just say a bit about, so for me, the poem I mentioned in the presentation, Drift with Buggy, that was very much about that idea of going out with your buggy and, you know, your little boy. And he at the time was obsessed with carrying a miniature football around. So he ended up running through the temple playing football, and then a load of whoever the legal people were working in there were kicking the ball around with him. And I absolutely did do some of that on purpose because I was quite interested in disrupting those sorts of spaces. And that bit of the City of London as well, you know, looking at power structures of power and sort of female feminine archetypes. I was really interested in all of that stuff. I mean, which is why I mentioned the sort of Debordian ideas of, you know, chuck the map away and, you know, use the goddess Sekhmet to map your way across the city. You know, that was part of the thing. But actually on the map, it says at the very bottom in very small letters, this map may not be accurate. You may find yourself lost. Enjoy it, which was kind of the idea behind it. It was just about being playful, really. you know.
Okay, we've got Ian with a hand up and Janette with a hand up. So we'll have Ian and Janette, and then we'll kind of wrap it up because it's sort of getting close to that sort of time. So Ian, off you go.
I just wanted to say, never mind Descartes, if you live in the UK, the Ordnance Survey was animated by the military. It was the military who decided that they needed a particular kind of mapping. And I think it's worth keeping that in mind when we engage with official maps.
Absolutely.
I think it's almost all maps across the world nowadays that are based on military maps. Yeah.
Should I just say something? I mean, I just think, yes, a map can tell you something, sometimes can tell you more about the person who's made the map than anything else. I mean, there are people who sing their maps, people who use stones and sticks to make maps. I mean, that and aerial maps, as we're talking about, they don't give their secrets away too easily. I mean, there are things that you can't see. The caves, the overhanging rocks. All you can see, because they're made by aerial, is what is from above, that where are the things hidden in the shadows. But I was also just thinking about Rona Lee, who made, she's an artist who made a piece of work which disrupts, I'm just reading this because I wrote it down. She disrupts the normal cartographical conventions representing land and sea, as she reworks the bathymetric data, inverting height and depth. So, she brings the sea up and she puts the land down. So she's mapping the world from the point of view of water rather than land. And I think that's a really, that's kind of makes you consider how you see the world, how you see unseen spaces.
Okay, so I think what we'll do is we kind of wrap it up there. We'll give the four panelists the sort of kind of last word. And I'm going to edit this, and apologies again for the technical hitch that we had on a couple of presentations, and a big thank you to our presenters for having made those presentations, because I know for some of us it was quite an uphill task. So thank you very much for doing that. But the last words, first of all, David, then Lucy, Janette, and then Emily.
Well, first of all, great apologies. I can't make the Wednesday event. I'm actually Waiting for Godot in Liverpool, so that was booked months ago. You asked us also if we had like a question to follow on, and I just sort of wrote an adaptation thanks to George Orwell in 1984. So it's who maps the past maps the future. Who maps the present maps the past.
Well, it's a golden oldie from me, but I still think it's worth talking about, especially after today. The map is not the territory, or is it?
I was just going to say one thing. It's not really a question, but it's something to think about. If you want to know a place properly, you must feel it to know and to really know it.
I'm putting a couple of artists' names in the chat that popped into my mind while we were talking, who have done wonderful things around mapping. And I would just say, Andrew, you sent an email to us saying that you think of mapping as making the intangible tangible. And I wonder if we could think of mapping as making the tangible intangible.
All right. Thank you so much, all of you. Thanks for everyone for attending. All the best.